Welcome, class, to the Art Toolkit, part one of, I don't know how much I'm going to break this up, but I'm going to break it up. This is the modern foreign language I am teaching you that we are going to get through in one huge lecture for the terminology and the language that you need to be able to approach talking about art, understanding art, and then we're going to use it for the rest of this class to delve into just how we can use these tools to describe the art that we're viewing. Let's dive into it. Well, I guess to start with, I do want to make a note about art criticism. Criticism isn't in that sense of negative criticism. You're not just like trashing stuff on what you could have done better or whether or not you like it or if, it's not my cup of tea, or I wouldn't put that on my living room wall. None of that is really helpful in itself for our purposes. Criticism is that language of being able to talk about and understand art. Your personal tastes, I'm not going to say don't have a place in art criticism, but I think you'll start to understand your personal tastes as to why you have them and maybe be able to articulate that a little bit better after this course because you now understand what you're looking at, how to describe what you're looking at, and a little bit about what that means. So let us start this epic 62 slide adventure that we will break down like you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. All right. Take notes. For the love of all things, take notes. This is the language that you're going to need to be able to navigate the rest of this course and any other humanities course, or honestly, a lot of other things. But to start with, let's just say this course. This is sort of a language class today, and the rest of the semester we'll be speaking and reading this language. So hang in here, focus. We're going to look at a lot of art today. The titles, artists, eras are not important today. Just get your eye in to what we're looking at, what specific things we're pointing to, and what they mean. All right, so first impressions. This is where we're going to begin. Before you even start talking about the painting, let's talk about how to approach the painting. Looking at the context of the piece. What is it? How is it displayed? This can help us on how to understand approaching the object. It's kind of like looking at the spine or the cover of a book before opening it. Is it a big leather piece with gold leaf and decorations? Or is it like a bright pink paperback that's like an inch thick? You've already got ideas on what to expect before you open the first page between those two kinds of books. So art is a bit the same way. Like, take a look at your surroundings. Don't just like run in there blind. Viewing perspective. There are clues in the painting or sculpture that will help you tell if the frame, pedestal, height on the wall affect how you see and interpret that piece. I hate to make you into those people at the museum, but often the painting will tell you what height it should be hung. The sculpture will tell you how tall that pedestal should or should not be, based on visual cues within the art itself. So, in your comments when you're like, you hung this wrong, it should be at least 1.5 feet taller, or that pedestal should be at least 3 feet shorter. Yes, you will be that guy, but now it will be so obvious to you, won't help but be able to help those curators, of which I am one, but I take time to read those pieces. So I think mostly you just say, well done, you. All right, let us break into what do we mean by stacked or alone up here on top. The display. Let's talk about two-dimensional display. This is a stacked display. This is the MFA Boston in their 19th century gallery, Americans Abroad. I love this room. Private collections, parlors, early museums, up until the 19th century, displayed art in this full wall style. It's the important pieces, the fancy, expensive, famous pieces are going to be at eye level. The less important or out of fashion pieces are shoved up to the top as sort of peripheral filler. The practice is called being ceilinged, where you use the word ceiling like a verb. Like it's getting ceilinged. And it's like banishment of a piece. And you can banish a piece of art or an artist by sort of sealing it versus keeping it at exhibition level, places where people can really consume and enjoy it. So the overall wall and the frames are some of the first things that you focus on. When you walk in this room, you see this beautiful, sumptuous red brocade wallpaper that they have. And then you see all of this gold, all of these beautiful gold gilt frames. And it's quite difficult to focus on any one object. You have to go into the room. Sometimes they're quite close. This photograph was taken sort of from the extreme end of the room. And as you can see, there's sculptures in the center and things. So you can never get too far away to take it all in at once. You've just sort of got to get in there and start wandering. Your peripheral vision is crowded with other things to look at. Your eye wanders. I love these as sort of this journey experience. You can come into a stacked display like this. The Wellcome Collection Permanent Gallery in London is another excellent example where there's just tons of magnificent, famous art that is stacked like this on display. And any given day, in any given mood, depending on how many people are in there, that can kind of control where you can stand and for how long. Or you can be all alone and it's just lucky dip day. You wander through, something different will catch your eye every time you visit the gallery. And everything's competing for your eye in this sort of stacked display. I really feel that these are really rich experiences, and thinking of what it means for a collector to have found this kind of varied group of portraits and landscapes. And, you know, we've got kind of great studies on individual pieces. We've got a lot of different styles going on here. It tells a story about the tastes and maybe the travels of the person that curated these. It's just kind of a wonderful, long story with many chapters. And versus stacked, we have individual display. This is the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York's European Gallery. I think this is probably what you're far more familiar with, what a modern museum looks like for displaying art. Each piece has its own space for you to focus on. There's usually at least as much void space as there is art. So like blank wall to painting ratio. So like a 3-foot wide piece of art would need 6 feet of wall space, if that makes sense. So that you've got sort of equal space on either side of you to take that piece in without anything bothering your periphery. When hanging an art installation or calculating these things, we talk about an art install in linear feet. So let's say you've got 120 linear feet of wall space. And so that would be counting up just how long is this wall plus how long is that wall minus the doorway and how long is this wall, etc. You would count up the whole linear feet of hanging space and then sort of divide that by 2. And that would be the maximum amount of actual art that you could put up. So if you had 150 linear feet of wall space in this room, you would be looking at 70-ish feet of art to hang. So as you can see, that's much more spatially divided. Each piece is very individualized. Remember that these older works of art were never viewed like this before modern times. So this entire European gallery that you're looking at, these pieces would have never been displayed like this in their original context. They'd either been in a stacked art display or in a niche in a religious or government building, there would have been a lot of active context around those pieces of art. So this is quite a new approach to viewing art in this individual display. All right, so we've sort of looked at the silverware before they've put the plate in front of us. Now let's work our way outside in. By the way, fancy dining sets. You wonder what to do with those 38 pieces of silverware at a really fancy wedding. You start on the outside, you work your way to the middle. So start furthest from the plate. That's the fork you use for the first course. Just like that, we're sort of starting furthest from the actual painting and working our way in. Let's talk about now that frame. Here we have John Constable's Hay Wain, 1821. FYI, after this lecture, the artist, title, date, all of that stuff will be written on each slide in text. They are not written in this lecture because you don't need to remember anybody's name or the title of any piece of art from the Art Toolkit lecture here. This is just examples for you to get your eye in. So please don't worry about John Constable or the Hay Wain or 1821. After this lecture, though, you pay attention to all that. But that's just there for you in case you are really interested in one of the examples we used today. You can go ahead and Google it and, you know, get into some stuff outside. All right. Let's talk about frames and reproductions. Everything we look at in this class is a reproduction, usually a reproduction of a reproduction, sometimes of a reproduction. Posters, prints, digital images are reproductions. So the context is out of context automatically. Understanding actual size, how it's situated, what height it should be viewed at is incredibly difficult because everything will be viewed at the exact same height of where this computer screen or where the projection is hitting. Oftentimes, if you Google an image, you will see it just like this, which is without a frame, just the image of the art without the frame. But let's look at how a frame actually changes your viewing experience. So this is what you're looking at if you would like say Google John Constable's Hay Wain. Also a note, if you Google John Constable's Hay Wain, I would say let's pause here and you can just go try it out. But anything that we look at, grab any painting, Google it. When you look at the image results, the color differentiation is going to be huge because reproductions can't really capture exactly what you're looking at visually as far as color. And what it looks like on my screen versus what it gets put up as a PowerPoint slide projection on the side of a wall, it will be different. So that's another thing that you really can't know from a reproduction is exactly the color quality. So that's often surprising when you meet a piece. So if you Google this image, you're just going to find this cut out. There you are in the middle of a very folksy, simple country scene. Very sweet. You got your little doggy on the bank here. You got your wagon, your horses, your farmhouse. It's quaint. It's folksy. It's country. And then this is in a typical frame from the period that Constable painted the piece. As a big fancy frame. Note the mat. So the mat here is this piece of paper that frames within the frame. It's cloth or board on the interior covering that usually frames the art, but its physical job is to protect the actual painted surface from the edge of that wooden or metal frame. So it's got a physical job to do, but it is often cut much larger than just that sort of lip of the frame, so that it is part of your viewing experience. Does this really elaborate, fancy, sort of refined, golden frame sort of seem a bit odd coupled with the simple country scene? There is no yes or no right answer here, but I think, tilt your head sideways and you can see what I mean by the two things, sort of like fancy versus rustic, being a little bit at odds. But this is one sort of curatorial choice on keep it historically accurate. So put it in a historic frame. This could be a genuine historic frame from the exact 1821 period. It probably isn't, FYI, but let's say it is. As a curator, you could be like, yes, authenticity, and frame that Haywain in an 1821 frame. Or you could go the extreme other direction as far as modernity, and put the print in a modern frame. You see, we've got this clean black aluminum frame here. Can you focus on the art better? Well, it's an individual choice here because art is often reframed in the fashions of the day as they change throughout the years. I'm sure the Haywain has been reframed many times in the last 200 years. So frames have existed since the invention of portable paintings. When things are painted right on a wall, it doesn't move, so there's no problem. But if it's painted on a board or a canvas that's portable, sort of 5 minutes after the painting's finished and the first guy to pick one up says, like, how am I supposed to hold this? How am I supposed to carry it? What happens if it sits on something? All of those issues get resolved by putting it in a protective frame. You got something to hold it with handles. You got something to hook it to the wall with. You've got something that protects it from touching the ground if it gets laid on its front. So a frame is that physical protective barrier for the work of art, but then it also affects the aesthetic of how you view the piece. So we've looked at these two examples. There's sort of two extremes of fashions throughout the years. You've got a much slimmer mat here. You've got this super sleek modern frame. That's one aesthetic choice you could make with displaying this. Here's a third choice for you, just to kind of give you an idea of the range of curatorial choices that have to be made for you to be able to walk up and look at a piece of art in a museum gallery. So this one's kind of that like A plus B compromise. This is a modern frame, but it's got that wooden gold leafed antiqued style to it. It's much less detailed than the original one, but it's still like minimal, but with a nod to that antique, softer look. And also you can see here, we went from a lot of frame matte, a little bit of matte, no visible matte. So the matte is still here. It's just protecting the piece inside that ledge where the canvas sits against the frame there. So there's going to be a little thin matte in here that's not part of your viewing experience. So it's just doing its job without adding any flourish. So you've seen 3 different ways to matte a piece. You've seen 3 different ways to frame the piece. Of course, that's 3 combinations out of potentially endless to give you the best viewing experience for this work of art. And I think this is part of meeting a piece of art in person that is always a bit of a surprise, even if you've studied it. Something about the presentation, the frame, the size of the art, the approach, the environment is always going to be unexpected, even if you know the piece well. Texture, I think, is the most difficult thing to understand in a reproduction. So looking at these digital images of art, understanding the actual texture of the paint on the canvas, I can't show that to you. Even when we study textured paintings, the best I can do is try to show you pretty good close-ups, but it's never going to give you that full experience as meeting the piece in person. All right, so framing experience. Which one do you prefer for looking at John Constable's Haywain? Which curatorial choice do you prefer, or a combination of these 3 sets of options? Why do you think that is? All right, let's look at Art's framing components. Ye old Mona Lisa. I will point out this is one that people mostly, when they see her in person, they get like upset that she's so little, because the Mona Lisa is a pretty small canvas. Like, she's small. I should have looked it up, but she's a little bit bigger than like a piece of printer paper. But I think people just think like famous equals big, and it's quite shocking that she's so small, but it doesn't sort of diminish how excellent she is. But honestly, people are like disappointed because it's like, she's so little. It's like, well, she wouldn't have been able to fit in Da Vinci's backpack and made her adventure to France during his lifetime with all those great stories if she was on a wall. So, I think some of those things, it's almost delightful sometimes how small they are for them to be so detailed or so beautiful. It's like, God, that's not a lot of space to work in, but they managed to make it happen. All right. Art is always sandwiched between layers to protect it. And which of these layers is present depends on the piece of art. So again, like, frames were invented 6 minutes after someone bought a painting that didn't know how to move it or handle it without scratching or rubbing the painted surface. So paintings painted directly on wood panels. A frame gave sort of a handling and mounting space around the edges. Boom, done. But then the frame rubs on the corners of the painting. So if you have a big frame lip, then some of the frame on a smaller lipped frame, you've got all these scratches on the original painting. Not cool. So the mat was invented, 6 minutes after the frame, right? After that problem of the frame rubbing on the art became a thing, you've got this piece of paper or cloth or board that pads that space between the painting and the frame on the front. So again, it can be just cut tiny as a little pad in the frame lip, or it can be a big part of the aesthetic of the design. Fashions change. So if canvas is wobbly, so backing boards or stretcher bars had to come in to keep the canvas in shape. So the evolution of framed art has involved a lot of sheets that go into a frame to sandwich the art to keep it safe and stable and happy. Not every piece will have all of these things, like, pastel chalk. My mother is a pastel artist, and, plexiglass is like quite static. It creates static electricity. And if you put like a piece of plexiglass or glazing in front of a pastel art, the static electricity will actually pull the chalk onto the glass or the plexiglass and lift it away from the art. So the art is essentially ruined if you move that glass piece. It'll look the same to you until the first time you move that glass and realize half of your art is on the glass and half of it's still on the paper. So you've got here that frame. Maybe there's glass, maybe there isn't. There's almost always a mat board or some sort of padding for that frame between that and the art. Behind it, you might have a stabilizing mount board, backing boards, dust covers. These things keep dust and grime from creeping in and around the frame. They also help sort of stabilize the whole thing from getting wobbly or off square, which keeps the actual art painting itself safe. From the side here, just give you some of that cross section of what you're looking at here. Here's some words that you should know to describe the frame itself. The rabbet, R-A-B-B-E-T, here you go. It sounds like rabbit. I guess I'm saying this out loud, but it's spelled with an E, not an I. It's the depth of the frame. So that's how much space you have to sandwich the art plus all the mat and backboards and dust covers and extras within that frame. So you can see here, this has quite a large rabbit. This one has a much thinner rabbit, right? There's a lot less space to stack stuff in this rabbit than there is here on the right side. So a shallow rabbit, you can't pack as much stuff. You might have like matte painting backboard. Um, so, all right. Then what does everything pin into? You've got this lip here. The lip hangs over the front of the painting or the front of the mat board. And it's the only thing that holds all of that sandwiched stuff from falling out the front. Minimalist modern frames have a very, very narrow lip. Both of these examples here on the left and right seem to have like a very similar lip. And these look like very narrow modern ones to me. So that means that shifting the whole sandwich of art stuff could fall out if the lip fails. Some historic fashions had really wide lips that covered the mat board. And so all you could see was the art. Fashions change, but the component functions, no matter how wide or shallow, big or small they get, they stay the same as what they do. All right, above that here, I see it's not listed, but molding. Molding is the 3D stuff decorating the front of the frame. So this one either is flat and doesn't have any molding, or I guess maybe you could consider that sort of sub-rounded edges as a bit of a mold or a bevel on the edges, whereas this has some molding, so it's got some decoration to the frame. So this 3D stuff on the front of the frame, that's molding. So it looks like a molded sculpture. It is three-dimensional. Right. So I think moving from the outside in, let's stop here for part 1, and we can talk more about what to actually do once we get a hold of that piece of art in the middle in part 2.